best bet was to turn and run for my car. Then I could hopefully make a getaway and alert the police. Hello, and welcome to all Dente Creepypasta, horror stories cooked to perfection with a splash of red sauce. My name is CZ, and I will be your server this episode. Today's portion was written to take the holly and jolly out of the holidays and replace them with hate and misery. This shocking ending will leave you devastated. Let's dig right in. For the last couple of years, my wife and I have hosted a Secret Santa gift exchange during the holidays. It's a fairly new tradition, but we thought it would be nice to put together since a lot of our friends can't really afford to buy gifts for everyone. We do it a little bit differently than some people might be accustomed to. Everyone randomly gets a name and has to buy that person a gift around $50. We have one get-together where everyone opens their gifts, but even after the swap, you never find out who gave you the gift. My wife and I agreed that that part is important. She says that what makes the holiday special is having good faith in all of our friends to get the person something good. In other words, if you're only buying a gift in order to get recognition for it, then the whole idea is kind of cheapened. Besides, these are our friends. If you can't trust them, who can you trust? Sure, there are exceptions where it's obvious who gave the gift, like last year when our friends Emily and Elena, who are married, ended up getting each other. Or also last year when Cynthia received a cheap ice tray as her gift from her recently ex-boyfriend, Mark. We were optimistic that this year would be filled with positivity, which it was, to a point anyway. We have a Secret Santa app that automatically emails everyone involved and tells them who they got. It's great because it allows us, as the organizers, not to get our Secret Santas spoiled. I got Troy, the newest addition to our party this year. I think I got the perfect gift for him too. Every time I go over to his apartment, there's stuff everywhere. Plates, silverware, Blu-rays. It's not like he's just too lazy to clean up after himself. It just seems like he doesn't have anywhere to put it all. So I got him one of those knife blocks, a dish rack, and a silverware organizer. That'll just cover the kitchen, but it's a start. I had a feeling Troy was going to appreciate it. The day of the gift exchange arrived. We had people drop off gifts in a pile as they came in. We all enjoyed some drinks and snacks as we caught up with each other for a couple of hours before getting down to it. By the time we started to open our gifts, everyone was getting a bit giggly. My wife pointed out that Troy seemed to have taken an interest in her friend Cynthia, which we could both get behind because they were the only two who were still single. It seemed like the party was alive and well. Most of the gifts were really good too, and people kept up their poker faces as far as I could tell when the present they brought was being opened. Of course, there were a couple of obvious ones, like our friend James, who most likely got his own wife, seeing as how she didn't know how anyone else would have known what she wanted this year. Marco actually ended up getting 2 presents somehow. I couldn't figure out why. I was worried that the app had messed up and someone was going to end up with no presents, but I did a quick count and realized there were 11 total presents for the 10 of us. I guess someone just wanted to make Marco's day and get him something in addition to buying something for their person. He ended up loving both presents, so it seemed like no harm for the most part, though I just worried it was a bit unfair to everyone else. The final present remaining came down to my wife. It was a black box wrapped in what looked to be a plastic trash bag and tied up in actual rope. It was, I'm not gonna lie, a really ugly exterior, and she had a lot of trouble opening it by herself. In fact, nobody could seem to pry the knot off of it. Granted, we were all kind of drunk at that point, so we ended up having to cut the thing open. She opened the box and pulled out a small piece of paper. She looked upset as she read it. Then her hands started to shake and her eyes glazed over. "What is it?" She showed me the slip of paper. There were just a couple of words on it. "Santa says you all die." I quickly looked inside the box, only to find there was nothing else inside. I can get kind of defensive at times, and I got pretty upset and took it out on everyone. Within a couple minutes, the party was over, and everyone was out in the cold. I wanted to get to the bottom of who the hell thought this would be funny by asking everyone who their Secret Santa was and doing a little research of my own to find out who was lying. But she insisted that it wasn't that big of a deal, and she'd rather not ruin it for everyone. Still, I felt really betrayed. These were supposed to be our friends, and I couldn't understand who would want to hurt her like that. But we were tired and just decided to retire to bed for the evening. I told myself I would get her something great to make up for it and started brainstorming some gift ideas, but all I could think about was who would do this? I stayed awake for a while longer trying to think of any reason that someone would have to try to spook us. That's when I heard someone rummaging around the house. A chill went up my spine, and after being frozen in fear for a few moments, I sat up and began to formulate a plan. My wife woke up and asked me what I was doing. There's someone in the house. Stay here and keep the door locked until I give you the okay. With that, I slipped out and locked the door behind me. My blood was boiling at this point. I didn't know if this had anything to do with the present from earlier, but all I wanted to do was find who was behind this and bash his head in. The only issue was I couldn't hear anyone moving around anymore. It seemed that the house was quiet. I methodically checked the entire upstairs. It was empty. As I was checking the last closet, I heard a huge crash from downstairs. I sprinted, fists blazing, but the scene I found in the living room was far more horrifying than I could have imagined. The tree had been knocked over into the fireplace, which was now on, and it had begun to burn. I heard footsteps running to the door, but I knew I couldn't go after him now. In a panic, I turned off the gas fireplace and ran to the kitchen to grab a jug of water. I poured it over the tree, which was beginning to burn even more, but all I could manage to do was slow down the rapidly spreading fire. Luckily, my wife had already called 911, and the fire department showed up before long. I was able to slow down the fire enough until they arrived. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it gets far worse from there. The police showed up and questioned us about what had gone down that evening. We told the entire story, and they were particularly interested in the app we had used to sort the names for the Secret Santa. The chief told us that an undercover police officer would be on our block for the time being, and to call 911 if we had any other disturbances. He also gave me a card, a point of contact for if we had any other information. It was nearly 4 a.m. at that point, and we were ready to put this nightmarish evening behind us, when I got a call from Terry, James's wife. They were both at the Secret Santa that night, and I noticed a couple of missed calls from her as well. Desperate for more information, I picked up, but before I could explain the mess that we had been in, she explained that she was calling from the hospital. Apparently, they had been driving home from our house when some maniac ran them off the road. She was fine, but went on to explain that James had been injured pretty badly, though he was expected to make a recovery. I decided that enough was enough. It was time to do a little investigation of my own. The next morning I headed out to the spot of the crash, as Terry had described to me. If I was going to get to the bottom of this, I had to be thorough. After all, as far as I knew, Terry was trying to cover up her or James' guilt with that phone call. I found tire tracks going off the road, but that really only clears one of them. I made a call on over to the hospital. I knew they wouldn't share any information, since that's someone's private medical info, but I acted like a concerned family member and asked if they'd been found. I was able to find out they both got admitted at the same time, so they were both in the clear. My next step was finding out who they got gifts for in the Secret Santa, which involved me showing up and asking to see the email. I had to catch them by surprise to make sure they didn't try to doctor anything. So I knew I had Troy, and my wife had Emily. It was already fairly obvious that James had his wife, Terry, but I did find out that Terry had Elena. Don't worry about keeping track of all the names. Just know that my list of suspects was narrowing. I also discovered that the person who went after them was in a white van with black tape over the license plate. Next on my list were Emily and Elena. It took me a while to come up with an idea about how I might prove their whereabouts, but I ended up finding a way to check on them without either of them knowing. See, every year there's this big Christmas tree in town square. Everyone in the town is encouraged to put up an ornament of their own, and the whole thing is live streamed for the entire month of December. They would most certainly go past it on their way home. All I had to do was go back to last night, around the time they should have been driving home. Luckily enough, I was able to spot their car on the stream. While that didn't necessarily clear both of them from what happened at our house, it did make them innocent of running James and Terry off the road, unless they had just gotten a second car that I don't know about. But I figured I could reevaluate them if that came to be the case. I also had to make the assumption that the intruder at our house and the crazy driver that went after our friends were related incidents, and the time frame of events seemed to line up with that theory. Of course, the nasty present my wife received only backed up this idea further. I tried getting a hold of Emily and Elena to see who they got gifts for, but neither one of them could be reached. The next and final couple was Marco and Gina. They'd taken an Uber home from the party, so all I had to do was show up and ask to see their ride history. When I arrived, Marco was actually kind of upset that I was accusing them. I thought to myself, this was it. It must be one of them. But I hadn't really planned for what I would do if I'd gotten this far. I didn't bring anything to defend myself with. Not only was Marco a big guy, but it was 2 against 1. I clenched my fist behind my back and slowly stepped away as Marco yelled at me, going on about how he was appalled that I didn't trust him after everything we'd been through. I figured that my best bet was to turn and run for my car. Then I could hopefully make a getaway and alert the police. Tension within me built as I waited for him to make a move. Just when I was ready to turn and run, Gina came up with the phone to her ear and said that Terry was on the line and she had just found out about the car crash. She invited me in to show me the evidence I was looking for, and stupidly, I accepted. For all I knew, this could have been an act to lure me in and make me more vulnerable. Still, when Gina delivered the news, I thought I saw something change in Marco's expression, like an understanding had come over him, like he realized now why I had to see their whereabouts last night. Still, I was jumpy inside of their house, and in my mind, I was keeping track of where they both were at all times for my own safety. Though I tried not to show it. Marco brought up their trip history on Uber, and to my surprise, they had gone home after the party, no doubt about it. They also showed me who their Secret Santa recipients were. Marco's was Cynthia, and Gina's was James. I told them I had to be on my way, and headed out, where a van was pulling up to the curb by their house. As soon as I looked up at it, it haphazardly sped away down the street. I ran after it and found that the license plate was covered with black tape. It was just like what Terry had described to me. I dialed 911 and let them know what had just happened. He was still going after people, so I knew I was racing the clock here. There were only 2 suspects left, Troy and Cynthia, the 2 singles who had been flirting at the party. I hoped to God it wasn't Troy after I'd put so much into my gift for him, but deep down, I knew it was. The nature of the crime at my house pointed to it being a male. Still, I touched base with my wife and told her to look into Cynthia while I confronted him. Everything was boiling down to this. Troy lived alone, so I wouldn't be able to get any info from anyone else. He did live in an apartment complex, however, so there had to be a camera somewhere that would prove he was out several hours after the party ended. I gave the police chief a call, and he agreed to send someone out to meet me at Troy's apartment complex with a warrant. I waited out by the office. This was our chance to nail him. What was taking them so long? As I waited around, I heard a familiar voice. It was Troy. I was so stupid, of course he'd come back after nearly getting caught back at Marco's. This was not good. He knew I knew, but he didn't let on to it right away. Well, 2 can play at that game. My only choice was to play dumb. He pretended to be surprised to see me. He always did have a good poker face. I told him that I had come to check on him when I heard about James and Terry. He told me he had just heard this morning and went over to the hospital to visit James. He was finally telling me something I could believe, a good move on his part. It would definitely make them less suspicious of him, but that wouldn't work on me. I'd caught him, red-handed, but he knew I knew too much. What was his plan? How long was he going to play dumb? All I had to do was stall a little bit longer. I decided to press him on it. I asked him if anything weird had happened after he had left the night before. I was hoping to trip him up with an inconsistency in his story, something that didn't line up with the actual timeline of events. All I got out of him, though, was that he had gone straight home. He asked what I had done after everyone had left, and it was at that moment that something clicked in my head. He was going to try to paint me as the villain. He knew we would be home and asleep after the party, so we would have no alibi to prove that we hadn't gone and run down James's car before coming back to set our own Christmas tree ablaze in an attempt to make ourselves look like the victims. After all, we'd set up the party. We could have structured it so that my wife would receive the creepy note from me. He was going to try to pin it all on me, but I was 1 step ahead of him. The detective arrived. I told Troy he was busted, but I knew it would be a battle to prove my own innocence as well. He continued to play dumb. The detective provided the apartment complex with a warrant, and we all sat down to watch the footage. This next part, I deeply regret. I'll never be able to erase that look of betrayal out of my mind, because the footage proved that Troy was innocent. I wish I had more time to apologize for accusing him, but I had to go check on my wife. All signs now pointed to Cynthia being the culprit. I rushed home, where my wife informed me she had just gotten off the phone with Cynthia's roommate. Cynthia was also innocent. This didn't make any sense. We'd cleared everyone who was at the party. Had we overlooked someone? Was it somebody else? Outside of the group? We soon got our answer. If you're easily disturbed, I suggest you don't continue. We got another call from the police chief. Emily and Elena were dead. Somebody had broken down their door and slit both of their throats, leaving them to bleed out under the Christmas tree. The killer had also slathered a message on the carpet in blood. It read, "Lesbo cunts," with arrows pointed up at them. I was sickened just by hearing about this. But the police had a strong lead on who the killer might be. Mark Berkeley, Cynthia's ex from last year's Secret Santa, the a-hole who got her an ice tray for a gift. Apparently, one of the first things the detective on our case did was contact the developer of the Secret Santa app. He was given a master list of everyone involved. I guess we never removed Mark from the list when we added Troy this year, and the app told Troy to get a present for Mark. Troy must have thought it was supposed to be Marco, seeing as how he would have no idea who Mark even is. That would also explain why Marco ended up with 2 gifts. Then Mark must have snuck in at some point and dropped my wife's gift into the pile. It was all starting to come together. We also found out that Mark had completely lost his mind when Cynthia had broken up with him a little over a year ago. There were multiple police reports of him threatening her, stalking her, and loitering outside her apartment. Maybe when Mark accidentally got the email about our Secret Santa, that somehow set him off again and he decided to terrorize all of us. Everyone still in her life. Everyone who's as close to her as he wishes he could be. The chief told me that he had already sent his squad over to Cynthia's, as Mark would likely be heading over there next after having hit every other couple at the party. But I knew that wouldn't be the case. If Mark really had snuck into the party to deliver the fake gift, he'd have seen what went on between Cynthia and Troy, and he'd be in a furious rage. He was saving his best, most brutal, cold-blooded strike for last, and Cynthia was never on his hit list. I raced over to Troy's as quickly as I could, but feared I may be too late when I arrived to find his front door had been left wide open. I walked inside. It seemed strangely empty. My heart sank. Was I too late? Or was Troy even home when Mark had arrived? I called out, "Troy?" No response. "Mark?" I headed into the kitchen, where I saw that the dish rack and silverware organizer I'd gotten him had been put to good use. He'd finally tidied up his crazy mess of stuff. For that little moment, I was glad I was able to get him something worthwhile. But then it happened. I'd never heard it coming, but I did see a shadow come over me as I noticed the other gift I had gotten Troy, the knife block. But one of the knives was missing. Thanks for listening to all Dente Creepypasta. Your total comes out to $50, but if you like this video right now, you'll get everything you just listened to absolutely free. This episode has been brought to you by the CZsWorld merch store. Check out the link in the description and get these cool designs such as CZsWorld and Kill, CZsWorld Cafe, and more. Remember to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week. Ring that death bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.